Sally! Sally! Sorry about that. For that moment I actually thought I'd pause the camera trying to get my Yorkie to keep quiet. Right, we do the second sleeve exactly the same way. Now I have used a little bit of PK Magic on one of my offcuts, and you'll see a little bit later on why. Right, let's go back to our table. It's actually been quite amazing. I share my home with 6 real cats. And today, for some unknown reason, they're all very quiet. So while they're away, let's be grateful. Okay, once you've done that, and this is sort of cooled down, it doesn't sell for very long, you can trim off your edges. Now you could have, if you wanted to, you could have in fact fused your 2 pieces of fabric and done your fancy edge through both layers of fabric. Still using the paper the exact same way, then your pattern would show both sides. Possibly when I do the next one I will do that so you can see the difference. Anyway, once we finish trimming it, you're going to have that lovely edge. I'm in fact going to make that the inside of my sleeve, and that is the outside. But we'll see, we might even change it differently. Again, you can use a lighter to seal those edges, or a candle. Right, let me trim these quickly. If your pieces haven't fused properly, in other words they start coming apart like that, just gently fuse them again with a nice warm iron. What they should look like is like that. It should be a solid edge, and nothing should be loose. I've cut a straight edge against this side, and that is the other side. If you lay your pieces out according to your pattern, you'll see which seams actually line up. Now I find when I have a seam that's going to sort of go round like that, I prefer to do it by hand. So I just use a small in-out stitch. But one could in fact use a sewing machine and just a straight stitch to do it. I'm going to use a sewing machine now to do the back of this so you can see what the difference will be. You'll see I've stitched that with a machine, sort of almost where the back would start. And we can gently just press it, finger press it, so the seam goes to one side. I'm going to continue doing the other piece by hand, but for me I get better control over my fabric. So I'm going to put there's my front, which is going to eventually be on our cat, like that. And the front, remember, right sides together, so it would be here. I've got actually right side and wrong side, so I need to turn it. It'll be right sides together, and we will gently sew it in. You may find it a little bit easier to pin it, especially if you've done a decorative edge on the edge. Let's put a pin in there just to hold it in place. Sandwich your pieces gently and just put a pin in place, and as I start stitching I will gently maneuver my fabric. I use very small stitches. I'm getting approximately 12 stitches to an inch. Being a quilter, that is just the way we learn to quilt, so it makes it that by the time we're finished, when we open it like that, it looks like it's been stitched by a machine. Tiny little back stitches. Right, you'll see I don't start on my edge. I actually start about 2 centimeters away. I'm using a very thin quilting needle, which has got a very small eye, but the needle itself won't make holes in your fabric. So I double stitch start, like that, and then I do very little in and out running stitches. So 4 or 5 stitches each time. You have quite a nice seam allowance, so you don't have to panic too much about your edge. We will cut the seams down a little bit just now. When you get to the edge where your fancy edge is, just give it a double stitch over your machine stitching. Turn round and go back up and round. I'm going to do that quickly. When I get to the part where it's going to start curving, I actually don't pin it. What I do is I do tiny little stitch and I back stitch it so that it won't move, and gently moving my fabric into place that my edges meet. And just gently, that piece will, as you're going, it'll, on the bias, it will stretch slightly and sort of move into place. It helps if your fingers are very dry and it's slipping, lick them or put a dab of water on them, or even a little bit of cream. Just be careful your cream doesn't stain your dress. But you'll see I'm moving my fabric with my thumb each time slightly closer as I'm stitching. So as we're going around that corner where the fabric went in two different ways, I am manipulating my fabric with my thumb. There we go. And just do a tiny little back stitch to hold it in place. And I move it again. And that is how you get those lovely curves, keeping your sewing in a fairly straight line. I could have done this on my machine, but it would have taken so much longer because of the size of the pieces. And then you've got to sew on paper to stop your fabric from slipping. So for me, it was just easier to do this particular seam by hand to give me the round shape. Great, I've cut back all the seams, and I'm just going to seal them slightly quickly. Not too close, don't want to catch fire. Just want to seal them so they don't pull out. And the last one. Done. Blow our candle out, move it out the way, and there we go. So we're starting to get some sort of idea of what's happening here. Now if you wanted to put your contrast fabric in the front, you'll see you've got the pattern piece, and I did say to you, iron some Vilene, applique magic onto the back, and you can do it. There are three different ways of doing this. You can do it this way, iron this piece in place, and then cover the sides with some of your threads or braiding. Hold on, I'll show you. So if I wanted to put this in, I could put it in now. I would put it in on top like that, and iron it in place, which will give us the contrast. Now I've deliberately not stitched the edge there because I'm going to put a little bit of lace on there just now. But the other way of doing that, you could in fact do it cutting the exact same size again. I just want to cut it out the top there. This is the way I like doing it, is I put a tiny bead of glue along my edge, and I actually just glue the edges down. When it's dry, I cut away the back fabric so that it's not as thick. So let me do that quickly. Now again, you'll see that I can seal the edges of this with the candle. But if I take this and I use my thin line of glue, and I do a thin row against that edge, like that, smooth it in, and I then glue that in place. Now remember, the glue is only on the edge, so what will happen is the edges will glue down. Whoops, I messed a bit there. My glue was coming out still and I didn't stop it. When I glue that in place on my dress, let's use this as our dress for argument's sake, we're going to glue it down. Once it dries, you will be able to cut out that piece of fabric. I've done this on a piece of scrap fabric because I actually don't want the contrast on this particular dress. I'm just going to use the contrast in our sleeves. So once this dries, we will cut out the back piece of that fabric. I'm going to let that dry so long and we can carry on with ours. I'm not going to iron that insert on this particular dress. I don't want it, but I am going to start doing my doll. Now, I just need to get all my pins and stuff out of the way here, because this is actually where the fun starts now. Because we've changed her dress slightly, remember in the original dress the front wasn't open like this. This one was a bit of an accident, so we're going to run with that idea now anyway, with it being open. I just want to go and press my seams all to one side. I'll be back shortly. Sorry about that. The joys of having family, I'm sure you all understand. I'm going to just double stitch where I want to open that seam up to, and just run a slight seam down slightly, and that should hold it in place for me. And I'm going to snip that off. Now you can in fact cut back that little piece that is too long. Again, remember you've got to singe your edges just so it doesn't run, which I'm going to do. And I'm going to just quickly, I unpicked the wrong seam, so I need to just quickly fix that seam as well. Back shortly. Wonderful. Now that we've got all our pieces the same and we're happy, place your dress on your cat and just see where your waist, the actual waistline is, and mark it with your fabric pen or with a pin, so that we're going to need to join those two with a little double stitch, just so we can keep the dress together while we arranging it all. So I'm going to just put them together like that, and just with a double stitch get them to hold for me. There we go. And let's just knot it at the back quickly. Double knot, I don't want it to come loose. And snip it off. Great. Now what actually happens is that your dress is partly, there we go. Now we can see how our dress is going to start falling into place. There's our front, which is going to be quite nice. With this fabric being so wonderful and soft, it's going to drape beautifully. Okay, I'm going to just hold that in place. I'm going to use a pin quickly. Just hold it in there. There we go. Right, now you'll see your front goes over like that. To paint a piece of lace, I use an old rag. I'm using a bronzy color, which I think will go very nicely. And I just dump my brush in it and rub it over. I don't saturate it into the water, because I actually want the bronze color more than anything else on this piece of lace. So I'm going to do that quickly. I then take a hairdryer and dry the lace. See how already it's showing you the color. I'm going to paint my piece quickly. I only need about 10 centimeters. So just cut that off and cut that piece and bronze it quickly. Great. There we go. Done most of that. I'm going to have a quick coffee break, and by the time I get back our lace should be dry. Great. Now that my pieces of lace have dried, I'm going to put one piece of lace across her back, like that, just to cover that piece there. I'm going to get some glue. There we go. And get the right side of my lace. Snip it off. Now I've got it nicely there, and leave that to dry for a second or two. Our glue dries quite quickly, so it's quite nice. And then the other piece I want to put around her like that. Now you can make it stand up if you want to and bring it down like that, or you can hold it straight down. I'm going to, because actually in medieval times they didn't have the big gothic collars, I'm just putting this in to look almost like her undershirt. So I'm going to put it in like that. Okay, and put some glue on my lace. And then I've loosely laid my pieces down on my webbing, and I'm going to trim my webbing slightly bigger